afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ACFID's Gender Audit Guide webinar. My name's Kate Angus, and I'm with ACFID's Learning and Innovation team. Before we start, I'd like to let everyone know that there is a chat area in the left-hand corner down at the bottom of your screen. Some of you have already put some words in there where you can see type message here. This is an area where you'll be able to type your questions during the webinar and let us know if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. So now, can we just please have some people type into that area to confirm that the sound is coming through nice and clear? Okay, that's great. Thank you, everyone. All those who typed, that's terrific. Just to let you know, before I introduce Juliet, who'll be presenting the webinar today, I'm just going to go through a few small housekeeping matters. So today's webinar is recorded, and we will send you the link when it's ready with a follow-up email, which should be within the next 4 to 5 days. At the end of the webinar, you'll be directed to a quick survey, so we'd like you to please just stay online at the end till you see the survey, and we'd really love to receive your feedback, which makes a big difference to delivery of our webinars. And to just run down briefly how it's going to go today, Juliet will give an introduction and present the webinar via PowerPoint, which you can see on your screen there. She'll work us through that PowerPoint. At the end of slide 19, we will have an opportunity for you then to indicate which of the remaining topics you would particularly like to hear a bit more about or to be introduced to. We will put up a poll on your screen and you'll have a chance to click one option. And then we will also be able to, at that point, have a look at the questions that you've already typed in and see whether or not we'll answer them at that point or leave them till the end. So type your questions in whenever you think of them. We'll scan them and then get to them as we can during the webinar. In a moment, I'd like to pass over to Dr. Juliet Hunt. Juliet's been working closely with ACFID over the last year or so on ACFID's research on translating gender audit findings into practice, and also on ACFID's own internal gender audit, which we conducted last year. She worked very closely with Alice Ridge, who many of you know, and she's more recently been contracted to produce this gender audit guide for ACFID, which we're providing for you, the members. The guide is almost complete, and the benefit of today is we have a chance to receive any feedback from you into the final version of the guide. And then it will be translated into an online learning format, and that should be available towards the end of the year, end of November, early December. We will email you all separately when it's available and encourage you to use it, have a look at it. So I would like to now hand over to Juliet. Thank her very much for coming all the way to ACFID's office to present the webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I'm just going to jump straight into it. This is an old cartoon that was written by Anne Walker, done by Anne Walker in the mid-1980s. I wonder if you've ever felt a bit like this. If you have, the Gender Audit Guide is for you. I'm not sure if it's still relevant to your agency's experience. That's up to for you to say, but I would say that it needs to have men on both sides of that long snail. So the snail there, in case you can't see, says funding institutions, and you've got people pulling from the front and pushing from the back. Here's what we're going to be doing in the webinar today. So I'm going to begin by talking about the purpose of the Gender Audit Guide, who it's designed for, provide an overview, a summary of the key areas of content that are in the guide. We'll have a small taste of section 2 of the guide, which is still an introductory section. We'll look at what about other aspects of identity. The bulk of the presentation is going to be, again, in the front end of the guide, why do a gender audit? We're going to be looking at some of the potential benefits and risks, and also organisational readiness. And that's where we come to slide 19, 20, and we have some opportunity for Q&A. So whether we get to the next few parts of the guide, the 4 dot points there, is really up to you and up to the amount of time that we spend on Q&A. So there's just a couple of extra slides, which are just really designed to give you a taste of what's in the guide. So the purpose of the guide is to provide some practical tips and links to tools to assist members to conduct organisational gender audits. It's been designed primarily for small and medium-sized ACFID members, but I think it's also going to be useful for gender specialists and champions in larger agencies, and I'll not sound arrogant, but I think it's going to be useful for people across the, in different sectors as well. I hope so. Anyway, it's designed so that you can dip into any section according to your needs, and you can follow the links to more detailed resources and guidance. The guide has a lot of tips, like the one that you can see in the text box at the bottom of this slide. So if you're not sure whether a gender audit is the right approach for your organisation right now, then check the section on organisational readiness. It's a step that really shouldn't be skipped. So before we go any further, we need to actually look at, well, what is a gender audit? It's a robust process for assessing how gender issues are addressed in an organisation, and that's across the whole of what an organisation does. So in its internal organisational processes and culture and structure, and across all areas of work. Now, you may have different words that you use to explain these different types of work in your agency, but really it's designed to be comprehensive. And sometimes the word gender audit is used is used at the same time as gender self-assessment. So most self-assessments, most gender self-assessments are actually gender audits, but these essential features that I'm outlining in this slide are what is needed if you actually want to qualify as a gender audit. So it's to assess accountability to gender equality issues, to gender equality commitments, and that includes your internal organisational policy, but also external international standards. I've already mentioned that an audit needs to be comprehensive. However, don't be put off by that, because you can do it in phases. The importance of having a rigorous and credible methodology can't be overestimated, because if you want people to actually accept the findings and be able to then build on them onto the next point, to learn and reflect and plan and go forward, it's very important that people see the findings as credible. A gender audit may be more or less participatory in its approach and methods, and the ones that are more highly participatory are often chosen by organisations, small and large, because they want to really emphasise learning objectives as a dual aim. Usually that's why people use participatory methods, and because they want to really reinforce ownership and understanding of policy commitments. The last point there is that an audit really needs to aim to improve organisational performance. And although the slide says this is, should lead to a gender action plan or strategy, it actually doesn't have to be that. But what it does need to be is a coherent and comprehensive action-oriented response, which is designed to institutionalise or embed the commitment to gender equality and to follow up on the gender audit findings. So another one of the tips that I've extracted, many tips that I've extracted from the guide, is a commitment to take action really does need to be explicit from the very beginning of the process. That's a very important learning, I think. So what is actually in the gender audit guide? In the left-hand column there, you can see the 8 sections, and you can see that it takes you through from pre-planning and thinking through whether this is actually the best step for your organisation to take, through to developing an action-oriented response, and lessons learned. And we're also, section 8 there, we're also interested in your feedback, in how you use it, what you use, and the challenges, and what went well. So in this next column, you can see the contents, the second and middle column there. So we're not trying to cover everything, since there are many resources out there, but what we do want to cover is the fundamentals, the important principles, what's been learned about best practices. I'm predicting the types of questions, hopefully correctly, that you may want to ask, and trying to answer some of those. Some brief tools and lots of tips in boxes. And where is this coming from? Where is it all coming from? It's coming from my experience. I started working in this area in 1999. I had the good fortune to be awarded the Churchill Fellowship in 2000 to do some research on gender auditing. And it's also come from the research that Kate mentioned in her introduction, that was done by Alice Ridge and myself in 2017 and 2018 with ACFID members on translating research and translating gender audit findings into practice. And then in the third column, you can see we have a second layer. We have some links to some brief additional resources which have been developed specifically for this guide, so they're original materials. So for example, sections 1, 3 and 4 have tailored additional resources that sort of sit underneath the guide itself. So to section 4, which is on planning and gender audit, for example, has a terms of reference for a gender audit working group or task force, and there are several others. But it also has every section, apart from section 8, which is the feedback section, of course, provides links to other resources, external resources. So it tries to give you, what I'd like to say is that, by and large, the guide is not repeating what is already out there in other handbooks. What it's trying to enable readers and users to do is to adapt what's already out there to your needs, to your organisation, to the size of your organisation, the number of staff you have, the resources, the motivations that are bringing you to this point now, so that you can actually have an effective process that can be translated into action. So that's our aim. This just gives you a bit of an idea, this slide, of two of the sections up front. We're only going to be looking in this webinar at the third dot point under section 2, what about other aspects of social inclusion and diversity, very briefly. And as I mentioned before, I think the bulk of the presentation is going to focus on the preparatory aspects. So what about other aspects of identity, social inclusion and diversity? Why is this question here? It's a question that most gender advocates and activists who lead a gender audit, or who are wanting to get one in their organisation, get asked at some point by other staff. A few organisations have begun to include questions on sexual orientation and gender identity in their audit processes, but to date, to my knowledge at least, and according to our research, Alice's and my research, they've focused on internal organisational processes and culture rather than on their outward-facing work. A few have also widened the scope to include other aspects of social inclusion, and that reflects agencies where their gender equality policies are folded into broader policies on social inclusion. There are some really important benefits from broadening the scope of an audit, because after all, we are not single-dimensional people, our identities are multidimensional, and so broadening the scope of a gender audit recognises that there are multiple levels of discrimination and disadvantage, and that gender intersects across all of these. And it can also help to get some buy-in from some key stakeholders. But I think it's fair to say that up to now anyway, there hasn't really been, to my knowledge, an adequate focus on intersectionality. So in other words, the way that gender intersects with other aspects of identity. And I think that in terms of looking at broadening the scope of gender audits to include other aspects of diversity, it's still very much a work in progress. I hope you can read the cartoon there. I'll read out the words. All my cartoons have been adapted from work by Anne Walker, but the words are mine. So the notice here says, all gender audits must now cover all aspects of diversity and social inclusion. And this woman here that's pointing to the poster is saying, great, identity is multidimensional and it's all about human rights. And that's one side of my brain is saying that as well. But the other side of my brain is saying what this woman is saying, but can we do all these things well with no budget? And it's not even in my work plan. So I guess I'm asking the question and putting out a challenge, maybe not to you who are on this webinar today, but certainly to our CEOs. Do we only get one opportunity to address all these important issues? I hope not. I hope we can get more than one because they're all really important. So it is worth saying that it's still a work in progress, and I think that's true internationally, not just in Australia. That doesn't mean it's not worth thinking about. It is worth thinking about, but the risks are, keep in mind that each question that you add to an audit process, each question for investigation, increases the time and resources needed, and that may reduce participation from staff, and it may also lead to a dilution of attention to all topics, including gender equality. The tip that I have in the box here down in the bottom right is actually not just a tip for this question, it's actually a tip for designing the scope of your gender audits in general. It's better to do something smaller as a first step and to do it well so that you have credible findings that are assertively followed up than to cover too much, do it superficially and risk lack of action. In other words, if you bite off more than you can chew, you won't be able to, to chew it up. You won't be able to swallow it. You can't digest it, and it won't give you much energy to take you forward. So that doesn't mean that you don't look at these questions. You must look at these questions, but what are some of the ways around it? Consider taking a phased approach so that all topics can be covered well, and consider also focusing on a limited number of social inclusion factors at first, perhaps, and doing them very well. So that would be my personal tip. So why do a gender audit? I'm not going to go through this diagram in detail, but if we look down the bottom there, you can see you've got laws and policies, gender-based stereotypes and social norms and practices. Well, in our organisations, I think it's fair to say that the human resource policy settings are generally meeting legal requirements, but I also think it's fair to say that they're not always meeting good practice requirements. And what do I mean by that? Are they always recognising that we're all bringing our gender-based stereotypes and social norms and practices that are surrounding us in our own communities and in society into our organisations. So, policies may not be known, they may not be proactively disseminated, they may not be implemented in some cases. So this in itself, I think that, despite our rhetoric, despite our best hopes and wishes, we are not always living up to our commitments. So that in itself is a reason for why to do a gender audit. When you're advocating for a gender audit, I think it's really important to consider the type of rationale that's going to appeal to your colleagues and to management to achieve buy-in in your agency. So the motivations and the arguments and the rationales that we may use in our advocacy to have to do gender audits within our organisations are often, they're often not the same as the explicit gender audit objectives that you might see documented. So there are many there. I've listed the ones that that I've come across personally over these decades of work. So, but they're not always documented. So, it may be protecting your agency's reputation, managing risks, feeding into a policy or strategy review. I look forward to the time when an organisation makes the decision to do a gender audit because they're doing a review of their whole of organisational strategy. So far, it's been a review of the gender strategy rather than, the whole strategic or operational plan. Sometimes, just moving on to the next point now, sometimes what donors say or what your international and regional partners say can be a really strong motivating factor. So there's been a couple that I've worked with, with organisations to do where, and in some cases I've heard the partners say, well, we've done our gender audits. You're talking to us about gender. When are you going to do your gender audit? So that can be a very powerful motivating factor. We want to learn about organisational culture. What do staff really think? That's an important motivator. And I'm going to just skip down to the last two now to save time. I think that gender audits we can really learn a lot about what is staff understanding of gender policy commitments. What do they see as their technical skills on gender equality? Do they see themselves as strong in this area or not? What do they identify as their priorities for professional development? These are some of the benefits of a gender audit, but they're also some of the motivations. I must say there's a very strong business case. You know, agencies that, and it's evidence-based. The evidence is based on research from private sector and government sector agencies. To my knowledge, it's not based on evidence from not-for-profits, but I could be wrong there, happy to be proved wrong, that agencies that deal well with gender equality and diversity issues are more effective generally at reaching all their goals, including their financial goals. But I haven't heard this motivation in my work to date. I think that the ACFID code is also a really good rationale, actually, for arguing the importance of working on gender, but also doing a gender audit. In the left-hand box there, you can see an extract of some of the Code of Conduct commitments, the ACFID Code of Conduct commitments. And the code looks both externally at the work that you're doing, your outward-facing work, and it also looks internally at your human resource management and operations. And I think these three, 9.2, 9.3 and 9.4, are looking internally at your operations. So for organisations that are committed to working through the steps, the good practice, the best practice steps that are outlined in the code, I think a gender audit can help you to do that. So what are the benefits? I think there's a huge benefit on shining a light on all aspects of an agency's work: human resources, financial management, organisational culture, how you communicate with donors and other stakeholders, with the community members, campaigns and so on, fundraising, programs, advocacy, humanitarian work. The benefits is that a gender audit can really help you to face up to, well, it provides an opportunity to face up to challenging aspects of organisational culture and practice that may have been hidden, or that may have been openly discussed, but only by a few people, you know, that may not have reached the ears of managers. So that's a benefit. And I think that can help to increase the pace of change by focusing on values. A gender audit will actually, if it's designed well, identify strengths. It'll help you to build on values and commitments, and it'll help you to go forward based on practical, evidence-based practical actions. And I think another one that's really worth mentioning is that it really can help to increase staff understanding of what the policy is, what the expectations are. And it can increase gender analysis skills if it's designed to do so. So this next slide with this cartoon here is actually drawn from experience from a couple of organisations. So what is being depicted here, I hope you can all read the text, is an example of a document review of communications materials. So what I mean by that is, it could be a fundraising material, it could be an advocacy or campaign material, a community education material. So the person on the left here is saying, we have a photo of a girl and boy on the front of the brochure, but that's not enough to rate it as gender sensitive in our document review, is it? And the one in the middle is saying, well, she's cooking and the boy is farming, but they both look happy. And this is real life, isn't it? This is a real photo. We're just showing what's there. What are we trying to do here? And then the person on the right saying, well, the photo does reinforce gender stereotypes, though. Let's think about what we could include in this brochure to show how we are addressing gender equality. Now, I have heard these conversations when there's been document reviews of these types of materials, and these conversations can happen, well, I think they happen because there was a guide, because there were some tips on how you actually review these types of materials, because there was some training which was helping people to do that. And hopefully the conversation continues. I'm going to focus quite a bit on the risks, not because I'm trying to scare you off, but because these risks arise in all agencies, and it's really important to talk about them up front, and all of them can be turned into opportunities. Gender audits hold up a mirror to an agency. Those mirrors where, like they've got that sort of circle of magnifying glass in them and they show up, absolutely everything that you might not want to see. Well, that's what an audit is like. So they always present managers with some challenging findings. It's not uncommon for managers to be shocked or to be hurt, and particularly when participants share experience of gender-based discrimination or even sexual harassment. Now, these things come up in gender audits. It's not just this agency or that agency. It would be very unusual if something like that did not come up in a gender audit. So it's good to talk to the CEO from the very beginning. Be ready. Or to the Human Resource Director, be ready, because these things tend to come up. But this is a really important opportunity, particularly in this Me Too environment. I don't think Me Too is going to go away. It's a wake-up call to regularly reinforce, what the policy is, what our practice should be, and what our values are. The other thing that always happens, in my experience anyway, of gender audits is that you will get diverse views on key issues among staff on a whole range of different things. So, for example, I think it's, every audit that I've been, had anything to do with, there were some significant differences between what women and men thought, for example, on organisational culture, on the leadership, whether it was taking gender issues seriously, and whether there were gaps between policy commitments and practice. Now, I'm not saying that all men thought one thing and all women thought the other thing. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there was a tendency for women to be somewhat less positive and for men to be somewhat more positive. Now, when you have this type of finding, I think it's an opportunity for leadership. It can actually break down silos. It can actually lead to greater understanding. It can lead to what we hope it's going to lead to is more dialogue and the shared ownership and shared understanding of organisational values. The other one that tends to come up, just to share with you all, is that program staff tend to be more critical both of their own and everyone else's areas of work, whereas community education, fundraising and administrative staff tend to be more positive about the extent to which the whole organisation is addressing gender equality. So it's good to be alert to these things that may come up, because, they can actually, these risks can be mitigated and they can be managed to produce a positive outcome. The other thing that it doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen, and it happens a lot, is that gender audits can bring up or can bring to the surface sometimes unrelated and long-standing human resource issues. This tends to happen in two types of cases. One is where the organisation doesn't have any other really authentic sort of opportunities for people to express their views. The other one is where people are just so overworked and, they see the audit as an extra impost, and it sort of tends to bring these sort of issues to the surface. So it's an opportunity to think about and discuss and think through what are the other workplace issues. They come up in a gender audit process simply because we're asking people their opinion about things, so they come up, even if they're unrelated. And of course it also prompts you, I think, to try and reschedule audit tasks if needed. Go outside your plan and make sure that the tasks are happening at a time when everyone who needs to be involved can be involved, and not feel pressured. The last risk I want to talk about today is when we do gender audits, we raise expectations that staff views will be taken seriously, that they will be heard, and that action will be taken. So how do we deal with this one? We need to emphasise from the very beginning that, with senior management, that it's important to follow through, and we emphasise not just at the very beginning but all the way through the process. And it's also an opportunity, we do have to take shared responsibility. We are all responsible for the type of organisations that we work in, and for them to become gender sensitive. So I just want to say again, these risks arise in all organisations to a greater or lesser extent. Don't let it scare you off. What you have to do is really just think about how you can manage them. Talk about them with critical friends. Talk about them with your gender audit task force. Which I'm going to suggest is one of the things that we really need to do. I'm going to move on to looking at organisational readiness now, and why we need to assess it. So what's being set up here by this guy on the left is, so it's agreed. We do the gender audit for our DFAT accreditation and we get a couple of women on the board and then we can get back to the real work. I think there's actually already a couple of women on the board there, and it could be a staff meeting. Well, no, this organisation isn't ready. Why have I got this here? Organisational readiness is really the key to whether gender audits are going to be shelved or whether they're going to actually assist an organisation to take action. So it's a really important step. And, you know, all organisations, I should say, I've got here most, but anyway, have staff who believe that there are no gender issues in their agency, including in senior positions. Maybe I should go back to most, because some organisations only have a couple of people. So this, again, is not a sign that you need to reject doing a gender audit. However, it does mean that you need to just to talk about what the, you know, to all the various aspects of organisational readiness. In her comments on the guide, I remember Kate asking me, how do you assess organisational readiness? Okay, when an organisation, so this is what this slide is about. When an organisation asks me to be involved or to mentor someone, you know, to do a gender audit, these are the types of criteria that I use. So, of course, the first one is approval from senior management, but it's not just approval, you know. It's really important for the CEO and others to have an understanding of the process and its implications. And I will often say, can I have a session with the CEO, or you should have a session with the CEO and talk about these risks, talk about the benefits, yeah, and make sure that they understand what the process is going to be. Most organisations these days, you know, are required, of course, they have a policy or a mandate. But what is important is that the people who are leading the audit are really clear about how the audit connects to that mandate. It's important to have some staff time and some resources, even if they're minimal, to be devoted to a gender audit, because it's not just about collecting the data, as I'm sure some of you would be aware. It's also about all that front-end stuff, the planning, the ongoing communications, the reflection that needs to happen on the findings, and then the follow-up. The next point is availability of gender expertise. I don't believe that you need to be a gender expert to lead a gender audit, and I would certainly not say that. I don't believe that, but I think you do need to have access to the capacity to undertake a sound gender analysis and therefore to develop ways of moving forward. So that can come from in-house, it can come from a group of people. It doesn't need to all be wrapped up in one person. Or if you do have the resources, it can come from, you know, selected pieces perhaps being contracted out. So, you know, peer review is an excellent way to actually get you know, a good complement, I think, of gender expertise. Political will is a separate point from approval because, of course, it's closely related to approval, but why I've made it a separate point here is because it really needs to be monitored and nurtured throughout the process. It's work, it's time. You know, it's time for the people who are leading the gender audit process. Now, if you're from an organisation that you think is already good at reflecting on its internal operations and practices, even if not on gender equality, then, you know, you're halfway there already. But if you're not, don't worry, a gender audit could help you to get there or to take some steps in that direction. So what I've got on this slide is actually an extract from a small group exercise that's an additional resource in the guide sitting underneath section 3, so it's not in the main text of the guide. And these questions, you may use them, I hope that they're text of the guide, and these questions, you may use them, I hope that they will be useful to think through, that individuals may think through as part of their assessment of readiness or discuss with others. They're not, like some manuals, they're not yes/no questions. They're questions to assess you, to help you to assess what you need to do to get the organisation ready. And I'm just extracting a few from what is in this additional resource in the guide. So why are you considering a gender audit or self-assessment now? Where is your organisation sitting on the issue of gender inequality? What are the steps, question 2 I'm up to, have been taken in your organisation to address gender inequalities in the last few years, and how effective have these been? These are important questions because, you know, the next question is, and what can you learn from that? What can you learn about, what worked well, what didn't work well? What can you learn about how you need to prepare people for this process? What can you learn about the methods that might be useful? What can you learn about the type of rationales that might work? What are the no-go areas that you really think are not going to work? So these questions are designed to actually flesh out some of those issues. And what changes would you like to nurture and achieve through a gender audit process? And that, are you really interested in learning in highly participatory methods? And do you want to have that as well as just assessing accountability? And how has the idea emerged to undertake a gender audit? What's the most recent history? If it has just come up in the last 5 minutes, like, the cartoon in the previous slide, then, that can be a really important motivation. Donors saying you must do a gender assessment can be a really important motivation, as I'm sure you will realise. And it's an opportunity not to be missed, but you can't do an audit in 5 minutes. So then what does that mean? Does that mean that you give up? No. What it means is that you build in a first step and build in a commitment, to give you the time to do it well. Okay, so we're up to slide 19, and in a minute we're going to be calling on questions. This slide here is, what am I asking here? Ready or not? When was this organisation ready to do a gender audit? The text under 1988 was actually written by Anne Walker herself, and the text under all these other dates has been written by me in those years when I, needed to do something and I wanted to take the temperature of the time. So in 1988, it says there's a meeting here, and this is a young woman, by the way, or a younger woman, at least, like under 40 or under 50, let's say. You were not invited because this meeting doesn't deal with women's issues. So that's what might be said in 1988 in this particular organisation, or any organisation. You were not invited because gender is mainstream now. That's what I felt was being said in 1998. 10 years later, a few more years, these documents don't mention women because gender is mainstreamed. You can't see it, but it's there. So, don't worry about being invisible. We're covering it. Leave it to us. 21 years later, now you can see why I started off with the snail. The type of temperature I was getting, which some of you may disagree with, was, well, we've got a gender balance on the committee. What more do you want? Is there actually anything more to this? Now, you'll be the ones to, reflect on whether I've got it right for 2018. Maybe I haven't. But what I've put there is the board and management are dealing with or have dealt with sexual misconduct and harassment already. We must stir things up more. We know what the problem is. We don't need to be in the meeting. So, ready or not, when would this organisation have been ready to do a gender audit? I think they would have been ready in all of these years, except perhaps for 1988. Oh, you could have made them ready, You could have got there, but not in 1988 because it wasn't even recognised as an issue. So now we're going to pause for this. We're going to do a quick poll. So, it's up there. Is that right? So what's coming up? And we're going to also see what your questions are. So we're going to sort of take 5 and Kate's very generously going to see if there's any questions that have come up so far. And we're going to ask you to just do this quick straw poll because we can only do a taste of what's in these next few slides. There's only 1 or 2 slides in each area. It's just designed to give you a taste and to, taught you to go into the guide itself at some point. So if you can just tick one option, and then we'll see if we can go through everything, or if we need to go back and answer any questions. So, have we got any questions that have come up yet? Not yet, no. So, I wonder if everyone's done the poll. Can you tell me whether anyone's done the poll? Yeah. So it looks like, the lessons learned is the lower priority. And in fact, that's okay, because most of us, the lessons are in the other areas. So, So I'm actually, okay, all right. Some questions coming. Oh, some questions are coming now. Okay. So, okay, so someone says there's sound dropping in and out, Vicky, but I don't know that we can do anything about that. Okay, that may have been the poll. I'm hearing.
Dropping in and out, sorry. Yes, the slides will be.
I'm going to go back to Andres' question. I'd like to understand how gender and other than binary gender is being addressed in these audits. I think I mentioned that to date only a couple have addressed that, and where they've addressed it up in relation to asking people to identify whether they have another gender identity, and asking a few questions about how they then assess the way the organisation is working. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I'm saying this is definitely still a work in progress. What we have to be careful about here is preserving confidentiality as well. So it's an important question to ask, and I would say that, this needs to be on all, particularly if you've got a survey, a staff survey, if you're using a staff survey, we do need to have some questions in those areas. So at the moment, it's still a work in progress, and it hasn't actually looked at the outward-facing areas in any way. So I think I would say that, well, not in a comprehensive way. I think that's a fair thing to say. Are we able to access these slides? Yes, we are. They're going to be sent out to you. Okay, I'm just getting some instructions about where to go now.
Down. There's one there and one more.
Okay. Yep. If organisation is assessed as not yet ready, what would you advise to do? I would advise to actually keep working, to work in other areas. Like that's a sort of a $64,000 question. I could spend the rest of the audit and probably the rest of the day talking about it. It really depends on what you've done now, and that's why that's Sue F who's asking that. That's why I'm asking this question here. What other steps have been taken in your organisation to address gender inequalities in the last few years? What have you tried so far? Has there been actually any attempt at capacity building? Have there been, maybe some dialogues? Has there been any discussion of gender culture and intersectionality, for example? So there's a whole range. I'm not going to be able to give some just straight up advice about what you need to do, because I think that's going to vary a lot according to the organisation and where they're at. And Elizabeth is asking, how light can an audit be before it loses credibility? That's a really good question. Thank you, Elizabeth. One of the things I always advise is to start small. It helps if you can do more than one methodology, but if you don't have the resources to do that, and you can only, have the time to have, to use one data collection method, that can be okay, And I think what is important is to think through the reasons for making the choices that you make and documenting them. It is important to try and tick off those essential criteria that were way back in one of the early slides, the accountability. But when it comes to comprehensiveness, I do often advise people that, you don't have to do it all at once. And if you do have organisational commitment to do something well, then you can sometimes phase these things. So, like one organisation that I've worked with actually took I think it was well over a year. I think I'm correct in saying it was about a year and a half, or perhaps even more. And if you start with perhaps a survey, or perhaps with a workshop, that's looking at some some questions, then you can actually try and build in some follow-up, some commitment to follow-up, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, we're not all in the same room, so I can't actually see if it makes sense. But the credibility issue, sorry, there's another one. I think I addressed that one, the binary, but we aren't really addressing it very well. Yeah, sorry, it was just another question that I was alerted to. Thank you, Elizabeth, for saying it makes sense. The thing about credibility is that, when I get onto, let me get onto the methods, because I'm going to address this issue about credibility when we get there. Yep. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on now and just touch on what time, where are we going for time? So there were a few people who said they wanted to see the planning and the main steps in the process. This is from section 4 of the guide. This is an extract from section 4. You can see the right-hand column here. I cannot emphasise enough how important communication with participants and key stakeholders is. And really, I should have made these little arrows go right up to the top and right down to the bottom. That's what I do in the second version of this, or another version of this PowerPoint. This goes to the credibility point too, Elizabeth, because, you know, if you're communicating about what you're doing and testing the waters, it's more likely to be accepted as credible at the end. This is why we're doing it this way. We can't do everything, but this is the choice we've made. This is why we've made those choices. That's not the only thing you need to communicate. You need to communicate about the whole process all the way through. So these funny little arrows under step 2 and step 3 are meant to say, you know, you might not do the steps in these orders, in this particular order, you know, but these are the steps that you need to take. I've already mentioned enough on step 1. I think it is very important to have a gender audit working group or task force. We haven't got time to go into that much today, but there are significant resources in the guide on that. Yes, we need to get approval, but you have to keep working on buy-in throughout the process. It's not a one-stop shop there. And all the way through to monitoring and evaluating the gender action plan. So I'm not going to spend much more time on that. So what else is in section 4? Well, it tells you what the main steps are and goes into a bit more detail. It tells you how long it might take to complete, but that's just a guide. 3 to 7 months is what's usually said in all the other manuals, but it's rare for them to be that short, I would say, in my experience. What type of resources and skills are needed? So one of the tips that I've extracted out there is that some organisations have minimised costs by piggybacking or integrating audit steps into other whole of organisation processes, like, for example, annual meetings, you know, that can cut down on costs. And it can also legitimise, you know, the focus on gender issues and the gender audit process. And you can see we have a whole range of other issues there that are looked at under, or questions that are looked at under section 4. You know, several resources on you know, setting up and working with a gender audit working group or task force, including some of the questions that you would need to discuss. We've got a sample gender audit outcomes and so on. Yeah, so that's what else is in section 4. I think I better move into the next one, which was the one that we had the second most people who wanted to know. This list here is the types of methods that are being used both internationally in Australia. So the guide actually starts by telling you what these methods are, just in brief, and then it continues on to look at tips and lessons learned that are associated with each of these lessons. I'm going to come back to the credibility question again. So we've got staff surveys, we've got document or desk reviews, we've got focus group discussions, workshops with staff and or other stakeholders, and a range of other methods which I'll come back to in a moment. Staff surveys, focus groups and workshops, these 3 methods are all assessing staff perceptions. They're all assessing staff perceptions of how an organisation is doing on gender equality. You know, we might argue about whether a document or desk review is going beyond staff perceptions. So how light can it be? It is good to validate in some way. But say, for example, you choose a survey, then you can validate by having focus group discussions or a workshop, you know, and you can go further into some of the issues that may have come up in the staff survey. Say if your primary data collection is a workshop, you know, then there are a whole range of participatory exercises out there to elicit information about strengths and weaknesses. You might want to back that up with doing a document or a desk review. So the manuals that have a primary collection data method around workshops generally also recommend a document review. But have it phased, I think. These other methods down the bottom are not often used. They've been very rarely used in the Australian context, but they are also there, and there are some, you know, some resources out there to assist you to use them. So what else is in section 5 on methods? How to choose and adapt methods to fit your organisation. So a lot of tips and lessons learned on each type of method, some tips on broadening the scope of your audit to include other aspects of social inclusion, but keeping in mind that it is still a work in progress, and also tips on collating and analysing and communicating the gender audit findings. The other point about the credibility issue is actually about conceptual rigour. So how do you do that? Once you've got a methodology, consistently apply it, document it, take some time to ensure that key people, informal leaders in the organisation understand what it's all about and that they can talk about it, so that you can yield valid and reliable findings, and then you will also increase your credibility. The other tip I've got there is that, the method you choose today might not be exactly the same as the one you choose for a later audit, because you would like to measure changes in performance over time. So do just have an eye on that, Some continuity is preferable, I think, if you do want to assess changes over time. We're moving on to section 6, which is the one that people are most interested in, and it's the one that I've actually got the least, on the PowerPoint on. So where are these lessons drawn from? They're drawn from, mostly from my own experience, but also from the ACFID's research. So ownership of the gender action plan is critical, and what you want is a gender action plan or strategy. The key managers in the organisation, they can understand, they can see the point of why they need to do this, So ownership, the rationale is clear for why you need to do one. Relevance and alignment is critical. So what do I mean by that? A gender action plan should fit your organisation like a glove. How else can I put it? You see those pumpkins and they've got a little pimple on top of them. Well, that's not a good action plan. What you want is your gender action plan to be the seeds inside the pumpkin. That's what we're aiming for in terms of relevance and alignment. Realistic, probably a silly analogy, but anyway, that's the one that came to mind. Realistic and achievable. So what we mean there, get some early runs on the board. Don't bite off more than you can chew. But at the same time, there does need to be, in an effective gender action plan, some actions that are addressing the causes of gender inequality and not just the symptoms that are coming out. So what do I mean by that? Things that are, promoting dialogue, promoting ongoing reflection, into social norms and gender stereotypes and how people are feeling within the organisation. Monitoring, evaluation and reporting of a gender action plan and external and extended accountability, they're the things that really help to embed or institutionalise this issue and attention to this issue into an organisation. I don't know any organisation yet that's ever published its gender audit, so how can you build in accountability internally and externally? How can we build that in? Is a really important question to ask, because it's absolutely critical to getting a plan implemented. I think it's also important to respond to whatever professional development needs, capacity building needs have been identified by staff through the gender audit. And I've got an exclamation mark after the last point there, because, what I've found is that long and wordy gender action plans are not the ones that are implemented. This does need to be a good communication tool, an accessible communication tool for the people who need to actually implement this. They need to be clear about what the expectations are. But it also needs to be a living document, so that's coming back to monitoring, evaluation, and adjusting. And I think it's important to, this tip is really critical, not following through with the gender action plan, is such can really have a bad impact on staff morale. So it needs to be something that, is continually talked about, and the benefits of actually taking clear and meaningful steps also need to be re-emphasised at this stage. And of continuing to look at it. And not many people wanted to look at the lessons learned, but I'm going to just put it up there because it's our penultimate slide, because they're the types of things we've already talked about. Organisational readiness, Communication, communicate all the way through. Don't stop, but contextualise to the way your organisation works. Formal and informal is very important, and try to build in multiple sources of accountability. There are other lessons and tips in the plan. So we're coming to the end now. It's taken a bit longer than I wanted, but we do have a few, we do have a chance for some questions. Are there any other questions that have come in? Do we need to give any more time for that? We'll just give a few more moments for that. I'll just say my thank yous now anyway. Thank you for tuning in, and best of luck with your gender audits. And if you do need, while we're waiting for questions, if you do have any feedback or further questions, you've got our contact, Kate's and my contact details up there. So far we're just getting thanks by the look of it, but a few others are still writing. So we'll just wait a moment, see how we're going. Oh, I'm going to pass it over to Kate now.
Just while we're waiting for any further wonderful thanks, and we have a question coming in, I just want to add a couple of things here before I lose you all. First of all, just to let you know that there will be a follow-up email coming with a link.
That's a question.
Yes, we'll get the question in a minute. There will be a follow-up email coming with a link to this on YouTube, which you'll be able to share with other people in your organisation. That will be available. And that email will also have a link to Juliet's blog, which I mentioned, and we'll send you a copy of this PowerPoint, so please feel free to share it with whoever you would like to. Also, if you can let other people know in your organisation who are relevant that next Wednesday there's going to be another webinar, but it will be on prevention of financial wrongdoing. That will be run by ACFID as well, and you can find that on ACFID's website. I'm going to pass back to Juliet to answer some of these questions, but then please don't hop off the line too quickly. We will send you the survey which you can fill in. So I'd also like to thank Juliet, and I'm going to pass back to her to answer a few more questions.
Okay.
Thanks for those.
Okay. I think there's one there before Sue's, which is this adaptable to our partner organisations? Yep. I've tried to make it adaptable, Jan. You know, see what you think and give some, you know, feedback if you think it's not. Because, you know, I think the lesson that I've taken from over all these years is adapt, you know. There are all those tools out there, but you always need to adapt. So I'm hoping it will be, because I think it's aiming to ask the type of questions that will assist you to adapt. Has DFAT done their own gender audit? Yes, they have. I don't think they're calling it a gender audit, but they did have a contractor who came in and did an assessment, and the report is online. I'm sorry, I can't remember. It's fairly recent, in the last few years, so it is available on the DFAT website. Where is the gender audit document available? I think Kate's already addressed that. It's going to be available online at ACFID, coming up in late November and early December, but this PowerPoint will be sent out. We're going to be emailing everyone individually. Are there any plans for a kind of meta audit by ACFID? Not that I know of. But yeah, that'd be fun. Let's do one, everyone.
And I'll be here.
Let's prepare. Yes, sorry.
And I'll be here.
Let's prepare. Yes, sorry. Any others? That's it. No other typing icons. Doesn't look like there's any other typing things going on. I know someone else is typing. Yep, there's a few other typings going on. A few people are coming in with their thank yous by the look of it. Could do a who's Elizabeth? Could do a meta-analysis of those organisations who have done them. I think that's what, Elizabeth, that's what our Alice and my research is, and that paper is going to be up online too in the coming months. It's in the final editing stages. So we've done that, but we only got 6. I think it was 6, or it might have been 7 responses to our research. So you know, there's a certain reticence about sharing these things, and you know, it's easy for me to say as an outsider that there shouldn't be, but what I found really interesting was that, you know, it's the same issues coming up. And you know what? That's not just for Australian NGOs. That's for partner organisations. That's also for bilaterals. I've had I don't know whether it's a privilege or a pleasure, but anyway, I've been able to work across the sector with partners, with ANGOs, with bilaterals and with multilaterals, and guess what? They're all the same issues. So thank you very much. I'm going to sign off now, and good luck again. Thanks for tuning in.